I'm Jane Harman, President and CEO of the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars, and I am delighted to welcome all of you to the first Rafiq Hariri debate. And I guess it's not a debate, it's a conversation. Yes, an inaugural event. The stated objective of which is, as transitioning Arab countries struggle to consolidate revolutionary change with elections and constitutional reform, it is still unclear whether they will succeed in becoming democracies, and so forth. And the question is, how's it going? And this is an issue that interests me enormously, and the expert, actually, who is living this in real time is to my left, but our partner in this exercise is the Atlantic Council, and Michelle Dunn is the director of the Atlantic Council's Rafiq Hariri Center for the Middle East, and she will moderate the panel. I just want to say another word about this. Shortly after the assassination of Rafiq Hariri in Beirut, Lebanon, I was there as a member of Congress and senior Democrat on our intelligence committee, and I was there with Jeff Feltman, who is now the Assistant Secretary of State, United States Assistant Secretary of State for the Middle East. He was then U.S. Ambassador to Lebanon, and the enormous crater left by this gigantic bomb was in full evidence in the corner of the gorgeous seaside, at that point wrecked in Beirut, and police tape was everywhere, and there was a makeshift grave for Mr. Hariri in a parking lot next to a shopping center. And I guess I can't help but think whether the world would be different if that had not happened. We have had a series of mostly extraordinary and difficult events, and a few good ones over the last decade. But it does occur to me that he was a singular leader in the region, and that it is important that a center that studies this region is named after him. So, for my 2 cents, I want to applaud the Atlantic Council for having such a center, and I want to introduce and welcome Michelle Dunn.
Thank you very much, Congresswoman Harman, and thank you for hosting us here at the Woodrow Wilson Center for this first, we're calling them the Rafiq Hariri debates on the Arab transitions. We don't mean to imply that they will be acrimonious debates, but you know, what we want to do is conduct a series of conversations between very well-informed people to explore some of the burning questions surrounding this wave of change in the Arab world that began in late 2010. And thank you also for your kind words about Prime Minister Hariri. So today I'm delighted to welcome Dr. Amr Hamzawy, member of the Egyptian Parliament, and Congresswoman Harman, to debate the question of whether the Arab awakening is showing progress or facing peril at this point, more than a year after popular revolutions forced major changes in Tunisia, Egypt, Libya, and as we see, the wave of change goes on in other countries as well. Our 2 speakers, by the way, today have a number of important things in common. Both of you are or have been parliamentarians. Congresswoman Harman had a long and very distinguished career in the House of Representatives representing California and playing a major role on national security issues. Amr Hamzawy is a new member of Egypt's first freely elected parliament, representing a very important district in Cairo, and he's already playing a pivotal role in debates about his country's future and also about national security and foreign policy issues. And I want to tell you, I'm not flattering him by calling him pivotal. He truly is, in this assembly of more than 500 in Egypt, one of a handful of deputies who is extremely engaged, active, proposing legislation, raising important questions. The Egyptian parliamentary debates are live on television every day, and if you follow them at all, you'll see Amr's level of activity and serious engagement, and so increasingly, I think he is depended upon in his country to be the one raising the serious questions and putting forward serious proposals. There's also a curious thing that the two of you have in common, which is that you both had major life changes in February of 2011. That was when Representative Harman resigned her political career to become president of the Wilson Center, and when Hosni Mubarak was overthrown, thereby starting your political career, Amr, after a decade in which you had been a rising star in academia, think tank world, Arab media. So in a sense, the two of you traded places in February 2011, with Jane going from politics into the think tank world and Amr doing the opposite. So
it's
that's
a
why
slight stretch, but okay.
So that's why I think you're particularly well matched for today's conversation. So we're going to begin with you, Amr, since you're our guest here in D.C. this week. Amr, there's an impression, I think, here in the United States that the Arab revolutions have gone off course, that the popular uprisings that initially embraced liberal values of freedom, dignity, human rights, democracy, have been hijacked by Islamist political parties that don't necessarily share those values. There's also a feeling, I think I hear it more and more here, that perhaps the United States and others in the West were naive to be so enthusiastic about the Tunisian, Egyptian, and Libyan revolutions. How do you see it? I mean, you are a person who you studied Islamist movements for years. You're a world expert on Islamist political movements and also on the prospects for democratic change. And now there you are, right in the center of the action in the Egyptian parliament. I'd like you to speak to how do you see this looking at Egypt, where we now see a great tension and violence in the run-up to the presidential election, and also in the other Arab countries that are undergoing change.
Okay. Thank you very much, Michelle. Thank you very much, Congresswoman Harman, for having me. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm flattered by what Michelle said. Michelle and I worked for 3 years at Carnegie here in DC, and so do not believe most of what she said. It's the fact that we have been working together for several years now, and we have stayed in touch since February 11, 2011. So I'm flattered by what she said, and I'm looking forward to our debate/conversation, and I am sure that it's going to be not similar to the debates we are having in Egypt, because debates in Egypt are real debates, where people get to stand in quite opposing positions and argue in a strong manner against the other party's point of view. Fine. So are they failing? Are Arab transitions, and the reference is to the three countries, Egypt, Tunisia, and Libya, failing? Is it legitimate to have such an evaluation of what has been going on in the three countries, highlighting the fact that, well, Islamists are taking over, they are on the rise, they represent a majority in the Constitutional Assembly in Tunisia, they represent a clear majority in Egypt's parliament. They have, with regard to the Egyptian presidential elections, more than one candidate, party Islamists and non-partisan Islamists. Are they on the rise in a way which would restrict and limit the potential for democratic transition in Egypt, Tunisia, and Libya? Secondly, what should we make out of the ongoing violence and ongoing human rights violations which have been happening primarily in Egypt, but Libya does not represent a very positive case. As of now, Tunisia is probably the least of the three countries in terms of facing human rights violations and repression since the departure of former dictator Ben Ali. Let me tell you how I see it, and maybe let me outline a couple of facts which, to my mind, structure our reality in Egypt, and they can be extended in one way or another to Tunisia. I'm not so sure about Libya. Number one, we are in a process of opening up a political space that has been for a very long time autocratically designed. And regardless where you look in Egyptian politics or in Tunisian politics, you are in a real need to re-engineer politics, to re-engineer the political space in a way which really opens it up. You take the question of parliament, for example, and look at the reality of parliament. Parliament in Egypt is a democratically elected institution. It has been the outcome of free elections. The elections were not rigged. We did not have substantial election violations in the parliamentary elections in Egypt. But parliament itself, in terms of its legislative and oversight mandate, is missing a great deal of what parliaments do in democratic countries. Yes, we can legislate, but it's a highly complicated procedure which we have to follow. And it means in the reality of the day-to-day management of parliamentary work is that we always have to wait and we always have to get approval from government. And if we do not get the government approval, I mean, that was an autocratic design. We need special majorities to pass our draft laws. With regard to oversight procedures, once again, we have an ongoing debate in Egypt whether the existing parliament can vote, can have a vote of confidence on the government, yes or no. And in a system like the Egyptian system, practicing oversight would only make sense if you can have such a vote of confidence. And we still have a constitutional debate whether we have it or do not have it. And even practicing oversight requires a government which is willing to listen, which is willing to work and cooperate with parliament. And we are far away from that. So yes, we have an elected democratic institution, but to get that democratic institution to practice what parliaments do in democracies will take time. Takes a sphere of civil society, and here we need to redesign the arena of civil society from a legislative point of view. We have to get rid of the notorious laws which have been governing civil society in Egypt for a very long time. Tunisia did so very impressively, very quickly. They passed an excellent law for NGOs, and we are learning in Egypt. I am serving on the Committee on Human Rights in Egypt, in the People's Assembly, and before I departed to Washington, D.C., the committee finished the draft of a new law for NGOs, very similar to what Tunisia has. So we are pushing in the same direction. But we have to reform and redesign the arena of civil society from a legislative perspective. And then in reality, we have to figure out how to redesign it in a way which would take it out of autocratic management and ongoing government repression. And that takes a bureaucracy reform as well. Take political parties and the apparent imbalance between Islamists and non-Islamists in Egypt and Tunisia. Did anyone expect it to be different? I'm really throwing that question to you. I mean, did you expect it to be any different? No. I mean, knowing the social fabric in Egypt, and Tunisia, whenever we had elections, I mean, those parties which were able to contest elections and contest them, of course, facing representatives of the respective autocratic ruling establishment, the Ben Ali establishment or the Mubarak establishment, were Islamist parties. I mean, it was the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt in 2005 to 2010 which managed to contest 20% of the People's Assembly, in spite of the autocratic management of the election, in spite of the fact that the elections were, parliamentary elections back then, were rigged in the second and third phase, the elections of 2005. And it has been the Islamist camp in Tunisia which has mounted opposition constantly to the Ben Ali establishment throughout the 1980s and 1990s and the years before the revolution. So in a way, yes, Arab revolutions in Egypt and Tunisia were not driven by Islamists. They were cross-ideological. And the beginnings came from non-Islamist camps, from young activists, from civil society organizations, from protest movements like April 6 in Egypt, and due to the sheer participation of masses in the Egyptian and Tunisian revolution. But the social fabric itself clearly has been dominated in a growing manner throughout the last decades by Islamists, and it has reflected itself in election results. So I did not expect the Muslim Brotherhood to win less than 40% in Egypt's parliamentary elections, and they won 41, 42%. I mean, definitely the showing of Al Noor Salafi party in Egypt is impressive. I mean, for a party to be formed a few months before the elections and then to win over 20% is unmatched worldwide. It's an impressive performance. But once again, I mean, Islamists have been a dominant component of the social fabric, and they have managed to build social capital, and they were able before the revolutions to translate that social capital in votes, and they managed to do so after the revolutions as well. Non-Islamists are weak, but they are organizing. I mean, what people are missing here in DC, I have the sense, is, I guess, and I'm reflecting on talks and meetings which I have had with administration representatives and government officials here yesterday primarily and earlier today. I guess they are still operating based on the same very autocratic design of Egyptian politics. So Mubarak left the scene, but they are still constantly searching for a replacement, for the one actor. And it seems to me that they have come to a quick answer, which is not very founded. That Islamists, or primarily the Muslim Brotherhood in the Egyptian case, or Al-Nahda party in the Tunisian case, do represent the replacement of Ben Ali and Mubarak. So in a way, the same reflection based on an autocratic design of politics, we still have one actor who gets it, who will manage it, seems to be prevailing in the administration. But that is missing to a great extent part of what's going on, a great part of what's going on. Non-Islamists are organizing better. Yes, we do not have even 10% in the People's Assembly, but we contested elections. We managed to bring down a constituent assembly in Egypt, which was not to our liking, and we had public opinion on our side. So the dynamics are changing. We are organizing as well. And polities are never balanced. I mean, you will never find a perfect balance between right and left, between right of center and left of center. I mean, it always goes through phases and waves, and we are well into real dynamics of politics, and we have to wait. So far to Islamists and non-Islamists. Let me share two final remarks, and then gladly listen to Congressman Harman. One, Islamists, of course, have been able to win and to secure big majorities in legislative councils in Egypt and Tunisia. Probably the same is bound to happen in Libya when there are elections. But Islamists are not that frightening or are not that negative in terms of their impacts on democratic transition. I do not see them as being less committed to democratic procedures than anyone else. Yes, there are difficulties which I am encountering in the day-to-day management of parliamentary activities with Salafi movements, with freedom and justice, the political arm of the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt. But their commitment to democratic procedures, I do not doubt it. I mean, I see them respecting the outcome of fair and transparent elections. I see them respecting the ballot box. I see them conducting themselves in most times as a responsible majority. Sometimes they overplay their hands, as in the Constituent Assembly in Egypt, but in most cases they do respect democratic procedures, and you can cooperate and you can build consensus with them. The new law for NGOs in Egypt is the outcome of a consensus building process that included Salafi MPs, Freedom and Justice MPs, Liberal MPs, including myself and Muhammad Anwar al-Sadat, who is the head of the Committee on Human Rights, and a Liberal MP in Egypt. And it was a consensus building process which worked out nicely. And once again, I mean, I do not doubt their democratic credentials. I am fearful of what might happen with regard to personal freedoms that needs to be discussed, with regard to women and their representation in society and their personal freedoms and rights. But it's not about whether they are committed to the ballot box and to democratic procedures or not. They are. Finally, human rights violations. That is sort of the one real troubling aspect of Egyptian reality, and where Tunisia is doing much, much better. Egypt is facing a set of questions which is not part of what Tunisians are looking at as of now. We are facing a set of questions related to human rights violations between February 11, 2011 and now. how to hold accountable those who are responsible for the human rights violations that have been taking place. And that takes us to the question of immunity of the military establishment, of SCAF, yes or no, and to the bargain between SCAF and civilian political actors, which we need to open up the space completely and redefine the position of the military establishment in the system. Let me stop here.
Okay. And there's a significant difference between Egypt and Tunisia in the sense that in Tunisia, first, the army stepped back and handed the political transition to civilians. And also there's already, I think, been a pretty significant reform of internal security.
Right.
Maybe not complete, but it's gone a lot further than it has in Egypt.
Yes.
In Egypt,
it's completely missing. No, we
everything
haven't.
is still there.
We
the
haven't.
Army,
We haven't.
Security.
Right, definitely. I mean, the army is a political actor since February 11, 2011. Political actor in the front line, of course. And now the question is, if they stick to the timetable of the presidential elections, how the handover of power to a civilian president is going to look like, and here's a bargaining scenario. Immunity, economic holdings, civilian oversight with regard to the military budget and their economic assets. And I mean, those questions will have to be raised. Security sector reform, unlike Tunisia, is completely missing. It hasn't been moving forward in Egypt in the last 18 months.
Congresswoman Harman,
there are a lot of differences.
Chance to address these
Sure,
issues.
and I don't think we're going to have a debate here. I think we're going to have a love fest. So for those who wanted
we can rename the series.
Yeah, wanted to replay here what goes on in the United States Congress, forget about it. Well, let me say a few things, the good news and the bad news. On a panel here at the Wilson Center months ago, someone said, what we're seeing is the birth of the Arab citizen. And I think it frames in some ways what Amr is saying. That is a real good news story. Democracy is messy. The movements to establish democracy, including in our own country, have taken decades. Let's understand that. They haven't taken, the length of one news segment on MSNBC or Fox News. And we're used to getting this all fast and in sound bites, and it's not going to be fast. It's going to take the time that it takes. I don't know what that is. So I think the whole point that Amr made, that it's the redesign, we have to, they are the people who live there, are redesigning the arena of civil society, is a big, important point, and it is underway. And I think that is a very good thing. And the fact that already people like him, with the talent that he has, have been popularly elected is a very good thing. I was watching all the heads nod as you were talking, so I think you have a future as a member of the United States Congress if you want to move here. I don't recommend it at the moment, but and they need you in Egypt. But at any rate, so those are all good things. I also think that the rise of political Islam, by the way, read this book, The Islamists Are Coming, and Who They Really Are. This is a Wilson Center publication edited by Robin Wright, makes the point that there are 50 or more different organizations growing up in this region. It's not a unilateral movement. It's very interesting, and we're updating this book online. So the rise of political Islam is the worst nightmare possible for al-Qaeda. That's something that should be out there. Whether you agree or disagree with the views of many of these groups, and I would strongly disagree with their views, they're in the political arena. They're subjecting themselves to election and accountability, which al-Qaeda is not. Al-Qaeda is trying to blow up the political arena. And so this is a good news story in terms of this long struggle we've had against terror and the kinds of tactics that al-Qaeda and other groups have practiced. Okay, so enough about the good news. What's the bad news? I think so far, with the exception of Tunisia, these changes have failed women. And women are doing worse in Egypt, at least in terms of their being elected and represented, than they were before the changes. I think we were chatting about this before this, and maybe Michelle will ask us. I think it was a mistake, and I think Amr would agree with me, not to have some kind of a quota system in the Egyptian elections. Tunisia had that. Tunisia had what was called a zipper law. Every other name on every slate, and there were between 80 and 100 slates, this very complicated election. Every other name had to be a woman, and as a result, almost 30% of those elected were women. It may take a generation in Egypt and other countries until people are used to women being elected and understand that we bring enormous competence and capability to the position of legislator. But at any rate, I think this so far, this has failed women. I also think that this soap opera about NGOs, which I gather is resolving, was extremely unfortunate, especially in Egypt. Didn't happen in Tunisia. If this law now passes and NGOs are restored, that'll be a good thing, but it won't happen in time to have observer delegations for the presidential election, which is the end of this month. And I think that's a loss. I think that NGOs like the IRI and NDI have played a really critically important role in helping countries to redesign the arena of civil society, not in taking sides. And I was proud to be an NDI observer in Tunisia, which conducted a very fair election. So, what is my net of all of this? I think it's headed in the right direction with some big speed bumps. I think the biggest problem so far is women. Women are being left out. But I think, as Amr said, there are ways to learn from mistakes and begin to fix this. And we have to bet on this side of the ledger. Democratic movements are good. Perpetuating autocratic regimes just because they are, quote, stable is not good. The Arab citizen has been born, and she, I don't think, is going to give up this fight. And I think our country, which has a limited role, the U.S., which has a limited role, we can only hope to shape some of these events. We can't lead them. Our country needs to stand on that side in favor of the Arab citizen.
Amr, let me ask you to comment a little bit on the issue of women's rights, women's participation, political participation. I mean, it really has been notable. Just a handful of women elected to the 500-plus member Egyptian parliament, and only a handful again appointed to the Constituent Assembly, which now has failed, but who knows whether it'll be better with the next one. I want you to comment on that. And then I also want to move on to, we've been talking a lot about the political and civil society factors, but there's also an economic side to this. In all of these countries, the three countries we're talking about have some serious economic problems, but Egypt perhaps the most serious right now, with a possible economic crisis looming within just weeks. So if you could address the question of women, and then what is the role of economic factors here?
Right. Well, on women, yes, definitely. I mean, I agree with Congresswoman Harman on identifying women as, especially in Egypt. Tunisia looks definitely better, but in Egypt, in identifying women as turning out to be losers in terms of the transition that is going on. And there are different reasons why that negative development has been taking shape in Egypt in the last 17 months. Definitely the fact that the quota system was removed from the electoral system governing parliamentary elections. We tried, and the we refers to primarily non-Islamist politicians, and some of them are now parliamentarians. We were pushing before the elections to have a quota system in place, to stick to the quota system which existed before, or to update it and amend it along the lines of general amendments of the electoral law. That was rejected by SCAF as well as by Islamist parties, and it meant that the number of female candidates for the 498 seats, elected seats, we have 10 appointed seats. The Assembly has a total of 508 seats. 10 out of the 508 are appointed by SCAF, used to be appointed traditionally by the President. SCAF has a presidential powers and mandate and has appointed 10 as well. But the number of female candidates in for the 498 seats was less than 10% of the total candidacy, which was very, very little. We ended up having only 9 women elected MPs,
out of
498.
9 out of 498, which is, and now we have a total of 12, because 3 were appointed. We have a total of 12 out of 508. But once again, if you take it from an election perspective, only 9 out of 498, 4 coming from freedom and justice. So, in fact, as a bloc, the Islamist Freedom and Justice has the highest female representation. They have 4 female MPs. Second largest bloc in the assembly, which is the Noor Salafi party, does not have a single female MP. And Al Wafd, liberal Wafd party, which is the third biggest bloc in the assembly, has 2 female MPs, and then other liberal parties bring in the rest. So a total of 9 elected female MPs, with appointed MPs 12. So the removal of the quota system was a big mistake to my mind. It should have been amended, updated, and we should have kept it. Secondly, unfortunately, we did extremely a bad job in terms of discussing and debating women's related issues, personal freedoms, personal rights, political representation, in the period between February 11, 2011 and the parliamentary elections. That was not part of the public debate in Egypt, unfortunately. It was sidelined, it was left aside, and of course we inherited, and one has to state that in clarity, because that is one of the reasons why it was sidelined. Women and their issues were, in a way, before the revolution, a domain for the First Lady, for former President Mubarak's wife, and in a way, the politics of managing women's issues had a clearly autocratic nature, and removing him and removing his family meant that in popular eyes and public debates, issues which were identified with the former president or his wife or his sons were out of what Egyptians were interested in. So that negative image continues to loom large in the background whenever women's issues are being addressed. I mean, let me give you an example. The National Council on Women was newly formed. That National Council was created due to an initiative which came from the former president's wife. And simply for that new formation of the National Council on Women has been widely criticized, and it's yet to be accepted in the press. And you have arguments for dissolving the council and not establishing it again. So women. Secondly, I mean,
quota.
Sure.
There's a link here. I mean, so the issue then, you're saying the women's rights issue is tainted by association with the former
autocracy,
which is also the case for the economic reform.
Yes, I'll come. Right, definitely. Right. But let me just, by means of looking ahead, I mean, one of the issues we really have to work on quickly in Egypt is, when we start the constitution drafting process, is to make sure that we enshrine in the constitution equality between women and men, and in a way get the mandate in the assembly to readdress different laws pertaining to women and their representation in the public space, be it in politics or in universities
and when
or
you
civil
finish
society.
That, let's add an equal rights amendment to our constitution.
Yes, well, right. Okay, or we can switch roles again. I mean, I come here to Woodrow Wilson, and you can happily go to the Egyptian Assembly and push for.
Well, maybe we'll in 10 years we'll have that conversation.
Right.
Okay.
So, we have to do that very quickly. Of course, the elephant in the room with regard to women and their rights is where Islamists stand. I mean, to be candid. And here we have a distinction that needs to be perceived and clearly located between freedom and justice, between the Muslim brothers who seem to be more willing to take moderate positions vis-a-vis women and their rights, and Salafi positions that are yet to be clarified. But what we are seeing in the assembly is a mixed reality. Some initial positions are frightening: bring down the age of marriage, change custody laws, move custodies from women to men, and I mean, those issues are frightening and do not attest to a commitment to equality between women and men or promoting female emancipation. So here, sort of the balance or lack thereof within the Islamist camp between sort of moderate positions presented and put forward by the Muslim Brothers and less moderate positions put forward by Salafis is going to be the defining component of what democratically elected institutions will do or will not do for women and their rights. On the economic situation, yes. A growing crisis in Egypt, and unfortunately, economic issues are yet to be debated in a constructive policy manner. I mean, which is the number one trouble we have. And here you look at what SCAF has been doing, what the existing cabinet has been doing, but even what the assembly has been passing in terms of laws, which I objected, but they passed due to the majority of Islamist parties. I mean, we have a state bureaucracy of around 6 million employees. We added 1 million to them. The assembly added 1 million to the state bureaucracy employees by virtue of legislative amendments that were introduced recently. We introduced, or the assembly introduced, a minimum wage and a maximum wage for the public sector regulation, which to my mind does not make any sense as of now, because no one asks the question, who is going to pay for that? I mean, do we have enough in terms of financial assets to account for it or not? It's a highly populist discourse. It's a highly populist debate, which we have been having on economic issues in the assembly as well. Now, I'm afraid that the economic situation is going to remain as is until we have an elected president, and it's going to be up to the president-elect. And then when he begins his mandate, it's going to be his mandate. We only have male candidates for the presidency.
Why did the parliament reject the economic program that was put forward that I think would have maybe enabled an IMF agreement?
It was part of a universal rejection to the government programs that Parliament has been putting forward. So it was not specifically the desire of Parliament to reject the economic program. Government programs were rejected, and of course you have been following the growing tensions between Parliament and Prime Minister Ganzouri's cabinet, and the rejection of the economic program is part of that, which is why we are in that stalemate probably until we have an elected president. The elected president will form a new cabinet, and then I'm hoping that debating economic issues will be pulled out of that populist rhetoric and that oversimplifying attitude, which is very apparent in Egypt.
I hope your currency won't collapse before that.
Yes, which is a big threat.
There is a way forward here. It doesn't have to be bleak. I mean, Egypt has a history of a robust private sector, the Copts, and one of the issues is whether diversity will be tolerated in Egypt, and hopefully it will. I don't mean just this male-female argument, but there is a strong Christian minority in Egypt, and wouldn't it be nice if also Jews were invited back, as they seem to have been invited back to Tunisia? We'll see what happens there. But all religions should be tolerated, and the Coptic Christians have been economic leaders, and it would be and sadly have been taking all their money out of the country while this less than attractive political season has been playing out. So it would be great if stability with an elected government could be achieved, and the economy could rev up again and qualify for IMF loans. I'm sure everyone would agree with that, and for foreign investment. That would be a positive future for Egypt, which right now has probably the worst economy in its history, brought to us by the managers of Egypt, who at least until now have been the military, and they weren't trained, so far as I know, to run robust economies. They're trained to protect the country from invasion. In Tunisia, the story isn't great, but it is better, and the story on women is much better. The family status law has been retained, and that is a law that allows women to divorce and gives them custody of children should they win that, and gives them economic rights and political rights. And maybe that will, over time, happen, I would hope, in Egypt, too. The country that has the best economic future, if it can only pull its act together, is Libya, because of its enormous natural resources. And there's a very small population and a lot of oil. So per capita, if again, competent management can occur and some stability in a democratic format, there's a huge future forward for Libya. I just want to add one last thing about the Salafis and the Islamists and the rest of it in terms of Sharia law, because I've had these conversations in both Tunisia and in Egypt. There are, again, the Islamists are not one thing, and there are different views. The Ennahda Party, which is the plurality party now in Tunisia, sees Sharia as a code of conduct. Think our 10 Commandments, not as a body of laws. And as a code of conduct, okay, you might not like it a lot. You might not like the 10 Commandments either. But that's very different from sending women back to the Stone Age. And in conversations that I have had with a number of Muslim Brotherhood representatives in Egypt, there was a group of 4 that were here a few weeks ago at the Council on Foreign Relations, and I encountered them, and I've talked to others, even at the Muslim Brotherhood headquarters in Cairo. Their version of it is sort of kind of like that. There are others, however, the more extreme Salafi types, who want to enshrine in law the Sharia tenets, which I think would be very harmful. So it depends all on Amr. How effective is he going to be as an elected member of the Egyptian parliament?
Well, I managed to stop an education amendment single-handedly. So I was effective in stopping an education amendment single-handedly, which
would have done what?
Which would have changed secondary school system from a 2-year based system to a 1-year based system in a very populist manner, without having a real debate on reforming the education sector and modernizing it, which the country needs. I mean, one of the big troubles we have, even from an economic perspective, is that our education system is not turning out graduates that the economy, the private sector, can use. And so I was against hastily rushing an education law amendment without looking into the real needed modernization. And I managed to stop it. I'm not sure whether I'll be as successful next week or not, because we will have a new round of debates.
We're counting on you.
Well, we'll see. I have 27 MPs whom I can mobilize, definitely, and then it's a swinging. It's
the Robert Caro book on Lyndon Johnson. And learn how he did it.
Okay.
He always got the votes.
Right. I mean, if he had to operate with a 27 group of MPs out of 508, I definitely have to read that book. But let me insert one comment on personal family status laws, because in Egypt it's exactly. I mean, up until now it's very similar to Tunisia. I mean, we have personal status laws which give women the right to divorce, which give women custody, and so on and so forth. So what we are fearing is that those laws might be amended very soon. So it's not that we have to struggle to get the laws in place. They are in place. We have to defend them. So the job of liberal MPs and civil society and women's rights movements and so on and so forth is to defend what we have and not to allow more conservative elements of the Egyptian social fabric and policy world in parliament as well to change those laws. Secondly, on Islamists in Egypt and Sharia laws, while I do see the difference, as I said, between more or less moderate Muslim brothers and more radical in terms of how they look at Sharia laws, Salafis, I'm afraid that once again here the balance can be disrupted depending on wider political configurations. So in one way or another, I'm afraid of political situations that might bring the Muslim Brotherhood closer to Salafis to secure majorities.
And at times they're allies, at times
they are allies, at times they are competitors, and when they are allies, it really comes down to a very heavy cost on women, on personal freedoms, and on balance in forming an important body like the Constituent Assembly which was formed in a highly imbalanced way. Women were marginalized, Egyptian Copts were marginalized, and that was the outcome of an alliance between the Muslim Brotherhood and Salafi movement. So it has to be looked at based on the different political configurations we are going through.
I want to ask you each one more question, and then we're going to let the smart people out in the audience ask you questions. But I want to start with you, Jane. Looking at this from the point of view of U.S. interests, you know, the United States was very involved, especially with Egypt, but other countries as well. There's a whole framework of, you know, peace treaties, peace with Israel, military alliances, and so forth. How do you think this is going to fare under democratically elected governments who are now accountable to public opinion? And what does this mean for U.S. interests? How do you think the United States should handle relations with these countries in transition?
Carefully. I said earlier that the U.S. role is limited here. We cannot manage these events, but we can, from the sidelines, try to help shape them. We have to pick a side. I think we have picked it, and we've picked the right side. We have to be on the side of the Arab citizen against this long history of autocracy and abuse of human rights and abuse of human dignity. Picking that side means we're going to have to, as the people who live there are going to have to go through a process, which at the moment is pretty messy. I mean, it was horrifying yesterday to see whoever it was gun down 11 people peacefully protesting in front of the Ministry of Defense in downtown Cairo. That has disrupted at least for the moment, the presidential campaigns of a couple of people. I hope it doesn't disrupt Amr assures me it won't disrupt the election. But I hope that's true. I hope this doesn't escalate into something worse. I don't know what will happen. And it's not just this region. Let's look at the drama playing out in Beijing this morning. So these things are happening around the world, and they're tough to deal with. So we have a limited role. What are our strategic interests? That question has to be asked. And I don't think our country has yet effectively articulated that. And I was one who was a bit skeptical about the NATO action in Libya, not because I wanted a massacre in Benghazi, which I didn't, and we didn't have it, fortunately, but because I worried about the precedent it would set. Libya, in contrast to Syria, is much less crucial to U.S. strategic interests. Syria is the back door of Iran into Lebanon and Israel, to remind, and also a place that harbors terror groups that actively try to attack us. That wasn't the case in Libya. So we go into Libya. We were, again, leading from behind. We didn't start all this, but we went into Libya, and our assets were used in this NATO campaign, even though we weren't in the airplanes. And finally, how did it end? It ended with the brutal murder of a dictator, not that we miss him, in the streets of Tripoli. And that message, of course, to other parts of the world is you give up your weapons of mass destruction, you might die in the streets at the hands of your own people, which obviously is a terrible message to send to Iran and North Korea. So what is my point here? My point is we have to be very careful as we define what our strategic interests are. We've picked a side, and I applaud that. But as this goes forward, what we do and how we do it has to be done very carefully.
Okay, so I think this is a great way to frame it then. Amr, how does it feel from your vantage point? Does it feel as though the United States has chosen the side of the Arab citizen, that the United States is standing up for the rights of citizens, the development of real democracies? How does it look in terms of U.S. policy toward Egypt, toward Syria and other countries? Right. And what should the United States be doing if we really want to help, you know, democracies to be founded in the countries that say they're now in a transition?
Okay, I mean, let me here to try to be as candid as possible, because I'm not so sure that the U.S. is being looked at as having picked up the right side. Once again, I mean, Egyptians, and I believe Tunisians as well, Libya is different. But in Tunisia and in Egypt during the days of the revolution, in Tunisia and Egypt, the U.S. Administration, and of course I'm not referring to U.S. media or U.S. Civil society and NGOs, which have been were in the days of the revolution in Tunisia and Egypt extremely on the side of the Arab citizen who was being newly born. I mean, I agree with the formula. Yes, citizens were discovering their rights and were discovering the public space as an arena of activism, peaceful activism that should not be disrupted by autocratic measures or by repression. But whereas media and NGOs were on the right side, the administration was silent to a great extent. And the engagement of the U.S. administration in the Tunisian developments throughout the days of the revolution in Tunisia and in the 18 days of the Egyptian revolution was quite minimal, to frame it decently. I mean, not to say that it was not very clear on which side they stood until the very end. But let's leave that aside and look at what has been going on since then. And in Egypt, once again, I mean, I cannot help but state that it seems to me that the U.S. administration is yet to have a clear vision as to how to redefine Egyptian-American relations, how to redefine the bilateral relations, which have been to a great extent framed in the autocratic setting of Egypt under Mubarak since early 80s. So the long decades of defining the bilateral relations with the different components of the bilateral relations, be it the military assistance package or the economic assistance package or trade relations or strategic cooperation or military cooperation and so on and so forth, the old definition needs to be updated. It needs to be modernized. It needs to be reconsidered. And I'm missing that. I'm not seeing that effort happening. And in honesty, I haven't seen much in my talks yesterday and today in terms of an orchestrated effort to redefine Egyptian-American relations. So I'm missing that to an extent. And secondly, I'm what I was referring to right at the beginning of my intervention. I'm afraid that the administration is really trying to replace Mubarak with more or less a Mubarak-styled new actor. And I was concerned as Congresswoman Harman was saying that she met Islamists, the Muslim Brothers, in the guidance office. And I was tempted, and still am tempted, to ask her whether she met non-Islamists or not on your trip to Egypt.
I did.
Fine.
Numbers of them. Oh,
okay.
I started there.
Because what I'm sensing, being in Egypt and looking at delegations coming to Parliament, coming to see political actors, official delegations primarily, is that in a way Mubarak is being replaced by the guidance office, and that is missing greatly what's going on in Egypt. I mean, Egyptian politics will not be defined single-handedly by Islamists and will not be defined single-handedly by the guidance office. And even if someone in the guidance office is being seen in D.C. as sort of the new strongman of Egypt, he is not. And the reference is to Engineer Khairat al-Shatir. So I'm afraid of that same autocratic framing. Let's find our man who will get it right. It's not going to be easy to find that man. Egypt needs to be taken seriously as having a growing democratic fabric. And in a democratic fabric, governments and non-governmental agencies and organizations have to reach out to everyone, majority and minority parties. It should not be limited to simply replacing Mubarak by Islamists.
And if I could just say one thing and tell a story. I first reached out to a huge diversity of people, and Coptic Christians and others who were running, many women who sadly were not elected. But I also went to the Muslim Brotherhood headquarters. This was before the parliamentary election. But while I was there, it was about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and I met with some fairly senior people. So I said, so where's the Muslim Sisterhood? There were no women anywhere visible. And the answer I got straight up was, oh, well, they go home at 2:30 because they take care of their children.
Do you have a comment on that?
Not on the Muslim Sisterhood. No, I will not. I will not. Right, I will not comment on the Muslim Sisterhood and the arrangements they have between the guidance office and their homes, right, and when they leave the guidance office. No, I'm interested in conveying that message that it's not only about the guidance office in Egypt,
and that I agree with that.
Right, and it's it would be unfortunate if the U.S. administration were to simply replace Mubarak with a Mubarak-styled actor. Final comment on what needs to be done. I believe that there are different tools in the hands of the U.S. to redefine the bilateral relations, the military assistance package, the economic assistance package, trade relations, and they need to be revisited really out of the box thinking. I mean, it's not condition or not condition the assistance. It's not use the waiver or do not use the waiver. It's not push it away from military assistance to education and economic assistance. All of that is relevant, but it really needs a new design. It needs a new design. And if the administration is not doing it, Michelle, we were discussing that maybe it should be up to experts, Egypt experts here in D.C., to start negotiations and outreach activities to Egyptian political actors to know what can be done and maybe push the administration later on.
But I think, Amr, as you said before, there needs to be an elected president.
Sure,
and
I agree.
A government responsive
hopefully
to the will of the people, not imposed by some who were not elected, that this administration deals with. I agree that all of this should be on the table. There was a very interesting op-ed yesterday by Tom Friedman talking about ones and threes, and he made the point that the military package in Egypt is $1.3 billion, and a package of aid for schools in Lebanon is $13 million. And he was talking about how important that education package is. And it's not just those two items, but a rethinking of the relationship and the support relationship, not just with Egypt. I mean, this should definitely be happening in Pakistan, as an example, not that we're talking about Pakistan today, and maybe other countries, and a look at international organizations like the IMF in terms of what they could provide, and an opening up of the society so that there can be foreign direct investment and private capital can come there, and thinking ahead about a regional economic engine, which could exist in some future lifetime, including the country of Israel. Now I've said it. But, you know, supplying a lot of the human capital, and some other countries also have human capital, like Egypt and Jordan, and many have natural resources, like Libya. And if that could happen, just imagine what the future could be for the newly enfranchised Arab citizen.
Okay, great. On that hopeful note, then, we're going to open up to the audience. I know we have our first question here. I know there are microphones. Please just identify yourself briefly and your affiliation, and then ask your question.
My name is Amal Modelleli. I'm advisor.
Put it close to your mouth.
Yes. My name is Amal Modelleli. I'm advisor to Mr. Hariri. And like Michelle, I would like to thank you for your kind words about Mr. Hariri, and I agree with you. My question is for Mr. Hamzawy about Egyptian foreign policy. From anybody looking from outside, Egyptian foreign policy is missing. Could you please tell us what kind of foreign policy we're going to see in Egypt after the transition? What kind of relationship Egypt will have with Iran, with the other Arab countries, regardless of the problem with Saudi Arabia, which will pass. What kind of Egyptian role we'll see? Because I think now in the Arab world, what's missing is really an important Egyptian role that's not there. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Let's collect a few questions at a time, and then you both can comment on them. Okay, here and then here.
Mohammed Shina, Voice of America. What are the major challenges facing transition to democracy in the Arab awakening, and what's the role of liberals in striking a balance with the Islamists in the three countries? Thank you.
Okay. Back here.
Barbara Slavin, also from the Atlantic Council. I wanted to build on Amal's question. Is foreign policy figuring in the debates at all that are going on now? If so, is it only in terms of Israel, policy toward Israel? And I'd like you to talk a little bit more about the peace treaty and whether it will survive. Are people talking about the situation in Syria at all? Or is Egypt still really absent and just very much focusing inward on its transition? Thanks.
Okay, well, let's take one more right here.
Michael Allen at the National Endowment for Democracy. Picking up on Amra's comments about the need to engage Egypt's liberals and democratic forces in the light of the NGO crisis, which was over, $60 million worth of US democracy assistance, and given from what one of our Egyptian grantees tell me that just one Salafist group received $35 million in the run-up to the election from Gulf sources. Mm-hmm. What role do you think external forces are playing or can play, legitimately or otherwise, in terms of providing assistance? And secondly, who will you vote for in the presidential election?
Would you like to start? And
Sure.
then you can
Sure. Let me start with the last question. I mean, as an elected MP, I'm not going to endorse any candidate. I mean, I'm supposed to introduce and realize a system of checks and balances with regard to the new president. So I'm not going to endorse anyone. And I'm not going to bet on anyone. I believe that if you look at the field of candidates, which is composed of, out of 13 candidates, that only 3 of them have a good chance to make it to the second round, to the runoff, and that the 3 of them are representatives of Islamists as well as non-Islamist trends, new and old elements in Egyptian politics, and so we'll have to wait and see. What I am hoping to see in the presidential elections, beside, of course, that the elections take place on time and that the timetable will not be delayed, will not be messed around with, is that the elections will be as fair and as transparent as the parliamentary elections, because we have a handicap. We have a notorious article in the Constitutional Declaration, which is article number 28, that in a way represents a dilemma to fair and free conduct of elections. But we'll have to wait and see. I'm hopeful that they will be fair and transparent, and I'm hopeful that we'll have a voter turnout probably even higher than the first phase of the parliamentary elections, where voter turnout was around 50%, 51%. On NGOs and engagement with liberal forces, what needs to be done, I mean, I know the crisis has been impacting widely on programming by American organizations and even European NGOs in Egypt, especially in relation to democracy promotion, and especially in relation to political activities. I mean, the only way forward is, to my mind, to wait until we have that new law passed, and then to begin to restructure and re-engineer that arena with the foreign funding component, with the foreign assistance component as well. Because what's a new law, I mean, I'm hoping that the draft which we finalized is going to stand debates in the floor unchanged or not fundamentally changed, because we have come to regulations with regard to foreign funding and foreign organizations similar to Tunisia, and it's going to emancipate that space from government excessive use of power and from government repression, and it's going to be based on notification and not legalization, and you are a legal entity as an NGO once you notify the Ministry of Social Affairs that you exist. You receive funds once you notify, and if the administrative side, if the Ministry of Social Affairs has any issues with what you are doing as a foreign or a domestic NGO, they will have to take their issue, not you, to the court not the other way around. So we will no longer have administrative rulings closing off NGOs or banning foreign funding or rejecting foreign funding. So it's going to be organized in a truly democratic manner. I'm hoping that draft law will stand elections in the floor, and then the arena will open up. We are in a waiting mode as of now, and I suspect that NGOs, especially here in the U.S., are in a waiting mode as well. But it's going to change soon. On foreign policy,
and by the way you answered that question, I think, was answering the role of liberals in striking a balance with other political forces.
Right. And now on foreign policy issues and how relevant they are, no, I mean what you were hinting at is completely accurate. I mean, we are too preoccupied with our own domestic affairs. I mean, let me tell you that I am not able to follow events in Syria or in Lebanon or in Sudan substantially. We have an extremely tough schedule. We are being rushed in Egypt since February 11, 2011, from a crisis to a new crisis, from a set of human rights violations to a new set of human rights violations, and we are doing a great deal of firefighting. Even in Parliament, we are doing a great deal of firefighting. Parliament was in session for 2 days, and then we had a disaster in Port Said to the north of Cairo, where over 100 people were killed in a soccer stadium. And so we are doing a great deal of firefighting every day, and foreign policy issues similar to the economic component will have to wait, very honestly, until we have an elected president and a democratically legitimated government. Where I would like to see Egypt going in terms of its regional and international role is to restore what we had, which was one of the very few positive components of what Mubarak and his regime were all about. I mean, we did not have conflicts. We were not part of conflicts or military struggles in the region. And I would like to keep that pacifist nature of Egyptian foreign policy alive. I mean, I would like to see Egypt becoming more active in defense of Arab rights, Palestinian rights, to continue or to get back to its mediator role. But I would definitely like to see Egypt staying outside of any military struggles in the region. So that pacifist nature of Egyptian foreign policy needs to be put forward, and we have to commit to it. And then we have to add a component, which we are beginning to discuss, by the way, in the Assembly, even in light of the Egyptian-Saudi crisis, which is, I mean, in the heart of it, it's about a human right violation. So, I mean, I would like to make sure that people here understand what's going on. An Egyptian citizen was arrested for several days, not knowing why he was arrested. And there was, at least we in Egypt had the fear that human rights were being violated in relation to that Egyptian citizen. And then the crisis began. But anyhow, I mean, I'm saying pacifism on the one hand and commitment to human rights and democracy promotion in the region. And that is, to my mind, what Egypt can offer if we have a successful democratic transition. That is going to be what we can offer to neighboring countries, Syria, what we can export in terms of the Arab neighborhood. Egypt used to export Arab nationalism in the 1950s and 1960s, tried to export commitment to peace in the 1980s and 1990s, and later on it was not that successful. I believe that if we manage to stick to pacifism and human rights, we can export both of them to the Arab neighborhood, government-to-government level as well as a non-governmental level. Finally, on the peace treaty with Israel, I do not believe that the peace treaty is going to be declared dead anytime soon. But most of what we have been seeing in the last months is bound to continue, in the sense of growing tensions between Egypt and Israel, and more of a distant pattern of relations, which even under Mubarak was very much the case. Of course, the fact that natural gas export was stopped is a big change, which was welcomed in the Egyptian public opinion. And I believe we are going to continue to sustain that very minimal level of relation with Israel, and the peace treaty will be kept. No one has an interest in debating the peace treaty as of now, and even if you look at presidential candidates, no one is really addressing that issue in a way which would undermine the peace treaty. So it will be kept unchanged, but it's not such a relevant component of what Egypt does regionally.
Congresswoman
Let me just add to that last point, and that is that a huge component in restarting Egypt's economy is to revive tourism. And I think an essential piece of tourism is keeping the peace treaty with Israel. It's not the only thing, but it is a part of it. And I'm pleased to hear the comment that it will be kept. I strongly support, our government strongly supports a two-state solution. And I think the sooner we can get those negotiations back on track and get to that conclusion, and most people have some idea of what it would look like, I think the easier it will be for positive relations to be restored between Egypt and Israel. And oh, by the way, when Egypt has time, hopefully soon, to focus on foreign issues, that would be a place where Israel's focus might be helpful in getting the parties back to the table.
Mm-hmm. Okay, let's take another round of questions. One from over here, please.
Yes, my name is Saeed Erkat, and I'm actually surprised at the lack of alarm at the rise of Islamist parties. I mean, everybody in this hall, in many other places, they talk about how modern they are, how willing they are to really forego, let's say, their constitution, which is the Quran, for a man-made law. But my question to you, Dr. Hamzawy, is what role is likely the military to play post the election, and will they be amenable to sort of turning over peacefully to a civilian administration? Thank you.
Okay, one right here in the front of the room.
Yeah, I am the ambassador of the League of Arab States. Regarding this one, I think I have a problem with the issue of ascribing to the Mubarak style, trying to have someone like that. I don't think so, because after what happened with the public opinion in Libya, in Cairo, in Tunisia, is against all these three regimes, which were really welcomed, and they used to have a close relationship with the United States. I think the United States would rather have the three regimes up to now. But the changes happened. Perhaps it's a surprise to them. And would rather have, and maybe that can extend even to Israel. They would rather have the three, including the Syrian and the Yemeni, if you want to add. So I don't think this, and now I sense there is a change in the foreign policy of the United States from my meeting with some officials, like, for example, introducing now more human rights, non-governmental organizations, supporting them. Also, like this initiative of open government partnership, they are trying to introduce in the Middle East and other countries also, like Atrocity Prevention Board. This is a new initiative also. It comes only within a year. This is one. The other thing regarding Mr. Hamzawy point regarding the detention of the Egyptian in Saudi Arabia, as far as I am ambassador of the Arab League, I know the facts. It's not a matter of human rights. It's a crime and punishment. The guy was detained with 20,000 tablets, drugs, and the consul of Egypt was called in the airport at the same time. He didn't stay 3 or 4 or 5 days in prison without his embassy knowing that, just to correct.
Thank you.
Thanks. Laura Schultz from USAID. Thank you for an excellent panel. Amar, you made some reference to some of the human rights abuses, and I was wondering if you could a little more broadly to rule of law issues. Some of the concerns I think that Egyptians have about a kind of a breakdown in security, absence of police and such, and what is your current assessment of that situation, and what are some short-term things that you think can be done to engender a greater sense of and comfort rule of law?
Sure.
Okay, we'll take one more. I see gentleman in the back of the room.
Hello, Mr. Hamzawy. My name is Salim Mustafa from Carter Center back in Cairo. I was wondering about the case of the Supreme Constitutional Court of unconstitutionality of the Parliament. What do you think of it, and what will go? And how do you evaluate the Parliament regarding the revolution goals? Because some people say that the Parliament is not acting or is not doing so good with issuing laws and decrees.
Mm-hmm.
I think most of these questions really are
fairly specific
to Amr,
Egypt
and
question.
I think he should answer first.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you very much. Let me start by Saeed's question on the military, and I failed to say that it's a pleasure to recognize so many faces here in the room. So I'm glad, in a way, I'm glad to be back. But to be back for a short time. I'm happy to go back to Cairo as well to resume my work. So, but it's good to see you all. Saeed's question on the military and whether the military will be willing to accept a civilian government to hand over power. I mean, that question is going to be relevant in Egypt for years. And it will not be answered in a one-shot process. It will take time, and we really have to look at the timeline relevant, and we have to look at the spaces, at the political spaces which civilian political actors hopefully will be able to liberate from the military gradually. I mean, Parliament is a civilian space, and it's a democratically legitimated space, and we are hoping that the presidency, which was a space controlled by the military since 1954, will be in civilian hands very soon. And then we have a third space in relation to oversight, civilian oversight, with regard to military budget and military economic holdings. And I have good reasons to believe that we will not enshrine in the new constitution of Egypt any measurement which would undermine the civilian oversight with regard to the military budget and military economic holdings. We have spaces in the state bureaucracy, in the Egyptian political system, which were for a very long time and still are under military control. I mean, forget about the cabinet, forget about ministers. I mean, look at governors, look at municipalities. I mean, the whole state structure has been militarized since 1954. And I mean, as an MP representing a district in Cairo, the district authorities with whom I am dealing with are full of military generals. And if not military generals, interior minister generals. So the whole state bureaucracy, the whole state apparatus has been militarized. And to demilitarize it, we will have to have time. It will take time. But the key questions are we have to get it right with regard to our new institutions in the legislative as well as the executive branch of government. We have to have democratically legitimated institutions of civilian nature. We have to avoid enshrining in the constitution any special treatment or status of the military. They have to be reduced to what they ought to be, a professional army, defending national security and borders, and that's it. We have to practice civilian oversight with all possible power and energy that we can attach to it. We have to practice civilian oversight with regard to the military budget and economic holdings. I know that we cannot touch their economic holdings in terms of getting them away from them. That will not happen anytime soon, but civilian oversight might be even more relevant. And then we have to get them to accept that the state bureaucracy will be demilitarized over time. So it's a process, Saeed. It can, and it's not going to be a one-shot
Because there are a
attempt.
tremendous number of military
Right.
and former
It's-
military officers and all kinds of
everywhere.
positions.
So it will take time, and that is one of the key questions. I mean, the second key question is balance or lack of balance between Islamists and non-Islamists. I mean, those are the two structuring questions of Egyptian political reality. With all due respect to the ambassador of the Arab League, no, I do not share your view. And the account which you offered with regard to the Egyptian citizen Ahmed al-Gizawi detained for 6 days before knowing and before hearing anything about the alleged number of drugs that he has in his suitcases. No, the account I have is different, and the account I have goes in the direction of human rights violations, and Egyptian authorities, Egyptian parliament, Egyptian government, and NGOs had and have every right to say that we are against the human rights violations perpetuated against any Egyptian citizen. It's part of the new Egypt, and they have to get used to it. We will not accept human rights violations. We will not accept them in Egypt. We will not accept them outside of Egypt. I'm not interested, with all due respect, in any government accounts in that regard. I know them. I do not need to hear that rhetoric once again. We have been hearing it from Saudi authorities in Egypt. You have reflected primarily the Saudi rhetoric, fine. The reality I have is different. It is an issue about human rights violations, and they have to know that as far as we are against human rights, as much as we are against human rights violations perpetuated against Egyptian citizens by Egyptian authorities, we are going to be against human rights violations of Egyptians or Arabs perpetuated by authorities elsewhere. On rule of law, it is, and here it really takes us to the heart of the matter, the security sector reform, the missing security sector reform, and why Egypt, unlike Tunisia, has failed to move forward on law enforcement. We are looking at a big mess. The Mubarak legacy has been to enable the security apparatus to control most of what has to be managed in terms of daily realities in Egypt. Security apparatus has been behind a great part of NGO and civil society repression. The security apparatus has been behind a great part of human rights violations perpetuated against Egyptian citizens. The security apparatus has been behind political party repression and repression of political activists. And it's an autocratic beast that is extremely difficult to reform, and we haven't seen up until now any will from SCAF, which is in charge of the executive branch of government, to work on the security sector reform. Offers from the US, from Germany, from other European countries to help in terms of reforming the security sector were turned down. I mean, I'm speaking here about information which I have. And so in a way, unfortunately, we have to wait until we have an elected president. All of what we try to do in Parliament to push the Ministry of Interior to deliver a plan to reform the security sector, and I've been working on that very hard with 4 other MPs. We are in the 3rd month of the Assembly, and we haven't received a single page from the Ministry of Interior to outline a reform plan, to outline a security sector reform plan. So we will have to wait until we have more of a political will up there in the executive branch of government, and then Parliament and the newly elected president will have to push for the security sector reform. Yeah. But law enforcement is a disaster.
If I could just add to that last answer. In Tunisia, during the elections, there were policemen, not military, at all the polling places, at least all the polling places that I saw. Both the military and the police were barred from voting in the election or having candidates in the election, and that was widely accepted. But the police force there works. Egypt has nothing equivalent, and there has been enormous amounts of violence on the ground domestically. No one has seemed able to control it. So I think a huge challenge for personal security will be the standing up of a domestic police force that is separate from the military, a gendarmerie force that acts fairly and isn't corrupt. But the second piece of this is, if Egypt is to revive her economy, and that will include foreign investment, there has to be security and a fair court system. And on the subject of courts, I was impressed. I mean, maybe Amr would disagree with me. I was impressed by the fact that it was the court system that made the decision about who was qualified and who wasn't qualified to run for president. I'm not arguing about whether the decision was the best decision or it wasn't, but the decision seemed to be widely accepted. And so there is, it seems to me, somehow in Egypt, the beginnings of a court system that can make decisions that have acceptability, and that's a good start.
Well, it's definitely more than beginnings. I mean, the court system is, I mean, Egyptians always take pride in the court system, have always taken pride in the judiciary, which has a long history of being independent. Of course, judicial independence has been undermined to a great extent in the last decades, but one of the laws we are working on amending is the law pertaining to the judicial authorities in Egypt, and we are hoping to have that done as well before we go to, if we are to go to the summer recess, end of June. No one knows, depending on the political situation. But yes, no, we have a court system which is respected, viable, but with regard to candidates in the presidential elections, it's a judicial body, the Election Commission, which has, by virtue of the constitutional declaration, that capacity to rule out, to eliminate, to get back in, and so on and so forth. They are accepted, but the judiciary needs a reform act as well. So I'm hoping we will do that.
What about the question about the lawsuit against the parliament?
Yes. Yes, there is a lawsuit which is being looked at in the Supreme Constitutional Court, and the Supreme Constitutional Court is supposed to decide or to issue an opinion on that on May 6th, so next Sunday. I believe that the political cost of declaring Parliament unconstitutional is immense. It's too high for anyone to take. And I believe that the Constitutional Court will not rule that Parliament is unconstitutional because of the very fact that the law based on which Parliament was elected was screened by the Supreme Constitutional Court before. SCAF presented the law to the Supreme Constitutional Court, and it was screened by them.
So it's hard for them to now say it's unconstitutional.
It's hard for them to say it's unconstitutional because they said it's constitutional. They declared it constitutional. And the reference is to the mixed electoral system we have. 2/3 of the parliamentary seats go to party lists, 1/3 to independents, but not only to direct mandates. I mean, I have to qualify the statement, to direct mandates. And on direct mandates, you have independent candidates as well as party candidates eligible to run. So there was an argument about the equality between party members and non-party members, and whether the system is not favoring party members and empowering them over independent citizens. But once again, the Supreme Constitutional Court said it's constitution before we went to the elections. And so I see it as less of a possibility, and the political cost would be immense. I mean, to bring down the only one democratically legitimated institution which we have. So I'm not so sure that it would go in that direction.
Well, assuming that it does not, I understand you'll be back in the Egyptian Parliament in session most likely on Sunday.
Sunday, yes.
With a lot of hard work ahead of you, Amr.
Right.
I want to thank you so much for being with us and sharing all this information. And thank you to you too, Congresswoman Harman, for participating in the discussion and hosting us here.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.